Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I'm currently recording this podcast on January 25th, 2026. And it is the day of the super big snowstorm that is covering basically the eastern half of the United States, all the way from Texas to the East Coast and Maine to Florida. I'm actually right now holed up in a hotel room near the hospital where I am currently on call for ophthalmology. And while I'm hoping there aren't people who will be coming to the ED today because the roads are bad, you just never know. And since I live 30 miles away from the hospital, it seemed like a wise idea to stay closer to the hospital in case I do have to go in. And actually, it was already the correct choice because there was someone who came in with an orbital fracture that they were worried had entrapment last night. So I ended up going in at 2 a.m. in the morning when it was already snowing and the roads were already starting to get a little iffy. So I'm glad I'm in this hotel room for the day, though being alone in a hotel room for a day is not necessarily my idea of fun. I'm in a Hilton Garden Inn, so it's a relatively nice room. There is a fitness center and a pool, which I'll probably go check out later. But having a day where I'm alone in a hotel room means it's a great time to work on podcasting. So in today's podcast, we're going to talk about how much do physicians really need for retirement. This is one of the most common and potentially one of the more anxiety-provoking questions I hear from physicians. Depending on where you look or who you ask, the answer can feel wildly different and even discouraging. I've heard some physicians say that they feel like they need at least $10 million to retire. But do you really need $10 million to retire? Let's unpack to see where these numbers are coming from and why physicians tend to think that they need much more money than the average American in order to have a comfortable retirement. The goal of this episode is to have you think about your retirement number in a way that's grounded and realistic. The idea for this podcast episode actually came up after I saw a slide that came from the Medscape Physicians and Retirement Report for 2025. According to this report, physicians on average think they need $4.01 million for a comfortable retirement. When it's broken down by gender, men reported needing $4.27 million, whereas women reported needing $3.57 million in order to fund a comfortable retirement. When asked whether they feel confident that they would reach this number by retirement time, 54% said yes, 17% said no, and 29% said that they were unsure. That means that nearly half of physicians either don't feel confident or simply don't know whether they'll hit the retirement goal. That uncertainty alone is important to consider. Now let's compare this to the general population. According to a survey that Northwestern Mutual did in 2024, the average American believes that they need about $1.46 million to live comfortably in retirement. That means that physicians, at least on average, think that they need almost 3 times more than the average American. Why is that? Well, let's look at income. In 2024, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median annual earnings for someone working full-time for the full year in the United States was $63,360. The median household income was $83,730. Now let's compare this to physicians. According to the 2025 Medscape Physician Compensation Report, primary care physicians earn on average $287,000 and specialists earn on average $404,000. That means that the average PCP earns about 4.5 times the average U.S. worker, and the average specialist earns over 6 times as much. With that higher income, often will come higher spending. That's only natural. And that extra spending can lead to a more comfortable lifestyle. But there are a few other factors that physicians don't fully account for. Physicians tend to have fewer working years with high income because of our long training period. Between college, medical school, residency, and potentially fellowship, many physicians don't hit their peak earning years until they reach their 30s or later. I was 36 when I completed my fellowship and got my first attending job. So compared to someone who starts earning and investing seriously in their early 20s, physicians have less time for compounding, as well as often carry a large load of student loan debt. This can make physicians feel the pressure to catch up. Because of that, physicians do need to save and invest more aggressively than the average worker to reach financial independence by traditional retirement age. That part is unfortunately true. However, higher income doesn't necessarily equate to higher required retirement spending. And this is where I want to pause and reframe things. Higher income means more cash flow today. More cash flow can mean more spending, but doesn't actually have to. It does make sense that someone who earns more would assume that they need more assets in order to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. But here's the key point. Just because you spend more doesn't mean you have to. Physicians often have far more flexibility than they realize. After all, you can choose how big your house is, how much you travel, and where you go, whether you upgrade cars frequently, and what kind of car you drive. You can also control how much you spend on convenience, and when is it worth spending your time versus having the convenience. That flexibility matters a lot when calculating retirement. If you look at traditional personal finance articles, most of them suggest that spending will go down in retirement and that you typically will need 70% of your current earnings during retirement. However, if we look back to that Medscape survey, is that also true for physicians? Well, according to the Medscape survey, 52% of physicians believe their spending will decrease in retirement, 36% think it will stay the same, and 12% believe it will increase. Assuming that there is enough money for a comfortable lifestyle in retirement, doctors were asked how they anticipate spending more money and time in retirement. The vast majority of physicians envision a life of travel and leisure activities, with 83% of physicians anticipate spending more money and time traveling, where 75% of physicians anticipated spending more time on leisure activities. Physicians also want to contribute to charity as well as give money to family. There are some who thought they'd spend more dining out, and others who look forward to having a second home. Then there are those who just thought they'd end up putting more into investments. This could be interpreted as that many physicians don't anticipate spending to dramatically drop, but rather to shift how they're spending during retirement. After all, once you stop working, you'll end up spending less on work-related expenses, commuting, as well as any professional costs. You'll also no longer need to pay for things like life insurance and disability insurance premiums. This frees up money to spend on things like travel, hobbies, experiences, as well as health and wellness. Typically, healthcare spending is the one expense that goes up as we age compared to all other expenses. This is why blanket assumptions about spending less in retirement can be misleading. How much you need in retirement is really a spending question, much more so than it is a net worth question. The most important concept I want you to take away from listening to this episode is that retirement planning is not about hitting a magic number. It's about how much you want to spend each year. Now, there's one caveat that many people forget, and that's taxes. When people throw out numbers like the 4% rule, they're usually talking about gross withdrawals, not net take-home spending. The taxes you owe in retirement depend on where your money is coming from. What I mean by that is, how are you getting the cash flow during retirement to have money to spend? Are you liquidating assets? Are you spending dividends? Or is it coming from positive cash flow from real estate investments? If the majority of your retirement assets are things like index funds invested in stocks and bonds, they'll depend on what account these assets are in. Depending on where you're withdrawing from, whether it's pre-tax accounts like traditional 401ks and 403bs, taxable brokerage accounts, or Roth accounts, your actual tax bill can look very different. For the examples I'm about to give, I want you to hear them as ballpark illustrations, not precise calculations, because again, the taxes will depend on where you're withdrawing money from. Let's say you want to spend $80,000 per year after taxes in retirement. Depending on your tax mix, you may need to withdraw anywhere between $90,000 and $100,000 in gross money to get that $80,000 in your pocket. Using the 4% guideline, $2 million in assets invested in stocks and bonds supports about $80,000 per year before taxes. To safely spend $80,000 a year after taxes, you may need closer to $2.25 to $2.5 million in your investment portfolio. Likewise, spending $100,000 after tax may require something in the range of $2.75 to $3 million, and spending $160,000 after tax may require $4 to $4.5 million, depending on tax efficiency. This is why tax planning matters just as much as investment planning. This is also why having money in different tax buckets, pre-tax, Roth, and taxable brokerage accounts, gives you flexibility in retirement. It's not just about how much you have saved and invested, it's also about how you'll access it. Now, if you're aiming for early retirement, the math changes. According to Medscape, 22% of physicians under 40 want to retire before age 60. 22% of physicians aged 40 to 49 also want to retire before 60. And 11% of physicians ages 50 to 59 would like to retire before age 60. If you are planning to retire before age 65, you do need to account for health insurance before you become eligible for Medicare. Depending on when you plan on retiring, you'll also be looking at a longer retirement timeline, which could possibly be even 50 years. In ophthalmology, I see a lot of older patients, and more I've had patients who are age 100. That means if you retire at age 50, you may have 50 years in retirement. This means that you'll want to consider more conservative withdrawal strategies. This doesn't make early retirement unrealistic, but it does require more intentional planning. Instead of asking, how much do I need for retirement? I want you to start asking, what kind of life do I want my money to support when I stop working? Then work backward. What does your baseline spending look like? Of that spending, what's optional? What could you cut out if you needed to? And maybe you only have to cut it out on years where the market's not doing well and spend more when the market is doing well. You want to ask yourself, how much flexibility do you want? By answering these questions, you can replace anxiety with clarity. To wrap things up, physicians on average think they need about $4 million in assets to retire comfortably. This number only makes sense when you understand what your spending will look like when you're no longer working, the lifestyle you want to live, and your timeline to financial freedom. The last thing you may also want to consider is any legacy you want to leave after your time on Earth, whether it's making sure a child with disability is taken care of or wanting to make a large charitable contribution to a cause that you're passionate about. Remember, your retirement number is not about keeping up with other doctors. It's about designing a life that you actually want and funding it intentionally. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you love this podcast and haven't yet left a 5-star review, I'd really appreciate if you would do that today. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, and I'll be back next week with another episode. Have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.